Hey guys, tonight we ease into the desert with you. Yes, you stepping out beneath a sky that looks like someone spilled powdered silver across an endless expanse of velvet. The evening heat still clings to your clothes, the kind that makes you instantly reconsider all of your life choices, including the one that brought you strolling across a medieval Persian plain in soft sandals instead of, say, taking a nap. You smell sun-baked clay, hear the softened whistle of a distant wind, and feel a flutter of curiosity as you realize you're about to learn how ancient Persians kept ice alive in one of the hottest climates on Earth. And don't worry, there's no quiz later. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this desert anyway, at least not without a lot more water and maybe a camel with good insurance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're drifting towards sleep already, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always a strangely soothing thing, seeing night owls and early birds from all over the world checking in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a few slow steps forward, letting the dryness of the desert settle against your skin, like someone turned the humidity dial down to toast. You squint into the lowering sun, its golden sheen catching on the horizon and reminding you that medieval Persia's vast plateaus could feel both endless and strangely comforting. Somewhere out there, people once fought to preserve something far more precious than gold: cold. And right now, you're walking directly toward the mystery of how they did it. The first thing you notice is the stillness. It's a quiet so deep it feels padded, like the world wrapped itself in a thick wool blanket for the evening. Your footsteps crunch softly in the dust, and with each step, you start to understand this landscape a little more. This isn't the chaotic bustle of a medieval city or the clamorous heat of a crowded bazaar. This is the outer edge of human tenacity, where the land tests people with scorching summers and freezing winters, and they respond by building miracles out of mud, geometry, and pure determination. A mainstream historical fact floats up as you walk. Medieval Persians really did pioneer impressive passive cooling systems, yakhchals, wind catchers, and underground channels that required no electricity, no machinery, just clever design working hand in hand with the climate. These techniques kept food fresh, water cool, and entire households tolerable during blistering seasons. They weren't just good at engineering, they were quietly brilliant. And then a quirkier tidbit joins the thought parade. Some Persian households even stored snow gathered from distant mountains in the winter, transporting it carefully at night to help reinforce their precious ice supplies. You imagine a string of workers moving in the darkness like a reverse Santa team, bearing snow into the desert instead of out of it. Historians still argue whether these mountain snow caravans were widespread practice or a luxury reserved for nobles with deep pockets, but the idea of it, human beings ferrying winter through the desert, lingers like a cool exhale. The horizon shifts again, and there, emerging from the flat earth like a misplaced giant beehive, stands your first yakhchal in the distance. A towering, pale brick dome rising from the ground, its shape gentle, rounded, almost serene. You can't help but grin a little. It looks weirdly friendly, like a giant clay marshmallow if marshmallows were designed by architectural geniuses and engineered to defy desert heat. As you move toward it, the sun drops a few more degrees behind you, and the air becomes more tolerable, still warm, but no longer bake a cookie on your forehead warm. The colors around you soften, fading from bright ochre to muted rose, and the yakhchal shifts too, casting a long, cool shadow that reaches toward you like an invitation. You step into it and feel the subtle difference instantly. Not exactly cold, but definitely cooler, like walking into a patch of shade at a summer festival and wondering why you didn't do that 10 minutes earlier. You brush your hand against the dome's rough surface. It feels sturdy, the clay mixture surprisingly smooth in some places where centuries of wind and sand have polished it. You can almost sense the countless hours spent constructing this thing. The workers mixing mud brick and volcanic ash, layering it carefully, shaping it with slow intention. You imagine them arguing gently over measurements, maybe with the same energy people now use to debate how to stack a dishwasher correctly. You take a step back, letting your eyes trace the perfect sweep of the dome. The thing is engineered to shed heat, deflect sunlight, and funnel air through its narrow openings. It's an object of quiet genius. And you're standing here at dusk, realizing you're only just beginning to understand why medieval Persians could keep actual, honest-to-goodness ice alive through months of punishing heat. A warm breeze nudges against your ear like a sleepy whisper, carrying the faint scent of clay and old water. You tilt your head, listening. Across the plain, you hear distant villagers finishing their evening tasks, soft laughter floating on the air, the muted clatter of pottery being set aside. The desert is cooling now, slowly, carefully, as if aware that you need the temperature to drop before you can meet the ice itself. A stray thought flits through your head. Somewhere in this desert, a night bird is probably wondering what you're doing out here staring at an ancient ice house. And honestly, if it started a podcast, you'd probably listen. You inhale deeply, taking in the dusty calm, and you let yourself settle into the moment. You feel the approaching night wrapping around you with gentle intent. Ahead of you, the Yakhchal waits ancient, patient, and quietly proud of the secrets it's kept across centuries. You take one more step toward it, feeling the journey beginning in earnest. The desert hums, the dome looms larger, and your curiosity sharpens into a soft, pleasant focus. The cool quiet of history beckons you forward. You continue walking toward the Yakhchal, letting your eyes follow the curve of its silhouette as it anchors the horizon. The desert dimming around you feels like a slow exhale, and with each step, you sense the world easing into night. The air cools just enough for your shoulders to relax, and you find the faint outline of a footpath winding toward a cluster of mud brick homes tucked against a gentle rise in the landscape. The village looks almost like it's grown naturally from the earth, nothing flashy, nothing hurried, just a calm gathering of shapes the color of sand and warm bread. You drift closer, hearing the muted hum of people finishing their day. A goat bleats somewhere, probably filing a complaint with management about bedtime, and a couple of lanterns flicker to life, glowing like fireflies suspended above doorways. The village doesn't bustle, it breathes. Everything moves at the kind of slow, steady rhythm you wish modern life would adopt at least once a week. As you approach the outer homes, you notice that the massive Yakhchal behind you isn't alone. Several smaller ones rise like gentle dunes of architecture scattered across the settlement. Their shadows stretch long and deep, creating strips of coolness between the houses. You step into one such shadow and feel the same subtle drop in temperature a natural reprieve engineered centuries before anyone invented air conditioning. It feels like stepping into a secret pocket of shade that's been waiting for you. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind as you cross the village threshold. Many Persian settlements really did integrate their ice houses into the layout of daily life, letting them serve not only as storage, but as communal landmarks. Some villages had one large yakhchal that served everyone. Others constructed several smaller domes to spread out the workload and reduce the risk of losing the entire ice supply to damage or heat. You imagine the local architect proudly saying something like, "Yes, that's my dome, and that's my other dome, and that one over there, also my dome." You try to picture what the medieval version of a building permit looked like, but it was probably just a really intense conversation over tea. A boy walks past you carrying a clay jug, nodding politely. He doesn't stare at you, which is polite, but also maybe a little too polite. You can't help but think he's used to strangers wandering in, as if the village regularly receives time-traveling tourists who ask too many questions about bricks. His jug sloshes gently, and the sound suggests cool water cooled, no doubt, by a yakhchal's steady grip. You wander between the homes, noticing small details, woven mats hanging to dry, carved wooden doors with patterns that ripple like wind over sand, and the soft glow of candles illuminating tiny cracks in the walls. Everything looks lived in, warm, in a human way, not temperature-wise. You become aware of the mild, earthy scent rising from the dampened mud floors. Villagers sprinkle them with water at dusk to help cool the houses through evaporation. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some regions, people even pressed fragrant herbs into the floor mud, so the evening dampening released a hint of mint or basil into the air. You sniff experimentally and think maybe, just maybe, you catch a faint trace of mint. Or maybe that's your brain trying to upgrade the experience like it's adding an essential oil diffuser. A soft breeze threads through the village, catching your ear. The wind slips across the domes, creating a low whisper that sounds almost like speech. It moves between houses and through narrow alleyways, brushing against tunics hung out to dry and stirring the dust in tiny, gentle spirals. The village breathes with it, moving in slow harmony. Ahead, you spot a group of elders sitting on low stools outside a house, softly chatting as the heat continues to ebb. One of them gestures toward a pair of yakhchals, apparently making a point in some ongoing debate. Maybe it's about ice storage capacity. Maybe it's about whose grandson dropped a clay jug last week. You can't be sure, but their voices carry a rhythm you can almost understand, easy, measured, unhurried. The kind of conversation you could fall asleep to, even without knowing the words. Historians still argue whether communities deliberately designed their villages to funnel wind toward the yakhchals or whether the layout emerged more organically over time. You look around, studying the angles of the walls, the spacing of the homes, the way air seems to move with purpose. Part of you wants to believe it was intentional. Some master planner crouched over a diagram thinking, yes, the breeze must come from this side. But another part suspects the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like most good things in history, it was probably half clever engineering and half happy accident. You drift toward the village center, where an open courtyard spreads out beneath a fading sky. A small fountain burbles gently, its water cool from being shaded all day, and you dip your fingers into it, savoring the temperature. Not cold, but restful. A small cat pads over, gives you the universal feline, "You may pet me now. Look," and then saunters away before you can respond. Classic. Two villagers greet you and point toward a seating area shaded by a stretched cloth canopy. You sit, settling into the woven cushions, appreciating the combined smell of dust, fabric, and faint rosewater drifting from a nearby jug. Your body unwinds almost on instinct. Maybe it's the desert, maybe it's the atmosphere, or maybe it's because nothing here is trying to rush you. Not the people, not the breeze, not even the setting sun sliding lazily behind the last ridge. One of the villagers pours you a cup of cool water cooled by ice harvested earlier in the year. They mention proudly. The idea of drinking medieval ice water shouldn't delight you this much, but honestly, it absolutely does. You take a sip, savoring the chill that still lingers even after hours in the desert air. This tiny luxury feels bigger in a place where keeping things cold is an art form. A donkey passes by wearing what appears to be a somewhat lopsided pack. You watch it plod along contentedly, and for a moment you think, yes, I too am spiritually a donkey carrying something slightly crooked. The animal pauses to nibble at a patch of scrub, then continues, utterly unbothered by the heat or your existential comparison. As the sky deepens into indigo, lanterns flicker to life throughout the village. Shadows shift, growing taller and softer, and the cooling air wraps around you like a slow-moving tide. You sit quietly, listening to the murmurs of conversation, the wind's gentle hiss, and the faint, rhythmic drip of the fountain. The yakhchals loom in the distance, silent and steadfast, their shadows long and comforting. You let the cool quiet seep into your thoughts. The village feels safe, slow, and perfectly content, and as you sit there, you realize you're becoming part of its rhythm, absorbing its stillness, its patience, its enduring relationship with the desert night. You rise from the woven cushions with a gentle stretch, feeling the quiet of the village settle around you like a soft shawl. The lantern glow deepens, casting warm pools of light across the ground, and the shadows grow longer, softer, more inviting. Ahead of you, the nearest yakhchal beckons with its curved, enigmatic shape, the architectural equivalent of someone raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Come see what I can do." You make your way toward it, steps slow and deliberate, guided by the low hum of wind brushing over clay. As you approach, the structure fills your field of vision, tall and smooth and surprisingly elegant. It stands not with the rigid posture of a fortress, but with the calm confidence of something that has nothing to prove. You stop a few paces away and tilt your head back, tracing the line of its dome until it disappears into the night sky. The closer you get, the more incredible the structure becomes. Its walls, sometimes 2 meters thick, are made of a special composite called sarouge, a mixture of clay, sand, ash, lime, and sometimes goat hair for extra strength. You run your fingers along the surface and feel the grainy texture, still sturdy after centuries. The dome feels cool to the touch, even though it's spent the whole day under the sun's magnifying glass intensity. That's because sarouge isn't just tough, it's highly insulating. A medieval engineering marvel hiding under an unassuming beige color palette. You circle slowly around the base, noticing the subtle slope of the exterior walls. They flare outwards slightly at the bottom, giving the whole dome a grounded, rooted feeling, like it knows how to stand its ground against windstorms, heat waves, and the occasional overly curious goat. You take another step and realize just how big this structure is. If you leaned your entire body against it, you'd barely occupy a dot on its surface. A mainstream historical fact floats up. These domes weren't just shaped for aesthetics, the geometry was crucial. The curved form minimized sun exposure at any one point and encouraged hot air to rise and dissipate. Combined with ventilation shafts and subterranean chambers, the whole thing operated like a passive refrigeration system centuries before mechanical cooling existed. You can't help but admire the cleverness of it. It's like Mother Nature and human ingenuity shook hands and said, "Let's make ice possible here." Then, a quirkier tidbit sparkles into your memory. Some yakhchals even had decorative ridges or geometric patterns carved into their outer layers, tiny aesthetic flourishes added by builders who clearly cared about their craft. Imagine being the medieval equivalent of an HVAC technician and saying, "Sure, I'll store your ice, but let me make it cute." You run your fingertips along one faint pattern, wondering whether its designer agonized over it the way modern artists fuss over font choices. You find the narrow entrance just tall enough for you to duck through and peer into the darkness. A faint, cool breeze drifts out, brushing your face like someone exhaling slowly. You step inside, the temperature dropping immediately as though you cross a threshold into another world. Your eyes adjust to the dimness, and you make out the interior's sweeping shape, the dome rising above you like the inside of a giant earthen cathedral. You pause, letting the quiet envelop you. The interior has an acoustic calm that swallows your footsteps and turns them into soft whispers. Staring up, you see the architectural ribs of the dome curve overhead, their lines converging toward the apex. It feels both ancient and futuristic at once, like something humans have always understood but somehow also forgotten. You walk deeper, feet crunching lightly on the packed earth floor. A wide pit yawns before you, the subterranean storage chamber where ice was stacked in enormous blocks. It's maybe 2 or 3 meters below the surface, and even though the pit is empty now, you can imagine it full of glistening slabs, each one wrapped in layers of straw or reeds to slow melting. You picture villagers clambering down carefully, moving ice like it's precious cargo, which, here, it absolutely was. Historians still argue whether the deepest pits of these ice houses doubled as storage for other perishables, things like fruits, herbs, or even wine. Some say the ice was too valuable to share space with anything else. Others argue that practicality would have demanded using every cool corner available. Standing here, you can see both sides. The pit is wide enough to hold treasures of all kinds, but you can also imagine an ice master jealously guarding every frozen ounce. You crouch near the edge and feel a gentle draft rising from the shaft that connects to the subterranean Qanat system underground aqueducts that snaked beneath the desert. These channels brought naturally cool water from distant mountains straight into the heart of the ice house. You lean closer and hear the faintest whisper of air moving through the vent, a reminder that this place was never static. It breathed, it lived, it worked. You straighten, letting your eyes roam across the interior. Despite the roughness of the materials, everything feels purposeful. The angles, the depth, the openings, positioned just so. You can picture the builders calculating each degree of curvature, each placement of brick, maybe scratching diagrams in the dirt and arguing gently over which method would trap the most cold. Someone probably accused someone else of using the wrong ratio of lime to ash. Someone else probably insisted they were right because their uncle once built a storage hut that lasted 3 generations. Medieval construction drama was likely very polite but extremely firm. A tiny sound catches your ear, a soft drip, like water falling from somewhere far above. You scan the interior until you spot a bead of condensation trickling down the inner wall. It's not much, but it's enough to remind you of the power at play here. Even with the desert heat pressing outside, the inside remains cool enough to create its own tiny microclimate. The thought feels almost magical. You step deeper into the dome center, feeling the temperature wrap around you like a cool scarf drop gently over your shoulders. The air smells faintly of clay and old water, with a hint of something mineral and soothing. You breathe it in and let your body relax, shoulders dropping, thoughts quieting. For a moment, you imagine the Yakhchal at its peak, stacked high with shimmering blocks of winter ice, villagers moving carefully in and out, their breath visible in the cool interior, even while the world outside baked under summer Sunday. You picture someone sliding a block of ice along a ramp, the sound echoing gently off the curved walls, like a slow drumbeat of survival and ingenuity. As you move back toward the entrance, you take one last look around. The interior feels like a sanctuary, cool, calm, purpose-built. And stepping out again into the desert night, you can't help but glance back at the dome with a kind of fond respect. It's not just architecture, it's a promise, a quiet one. A promise that even in harsh places, humans find ways to create comfort, relief, and even a little wonder. You take a deep breath in the warm night air and continue your journey forward. You step back into the night air, feeling the shift from the cool interior of the Yakhchal to the warm desert breeze. But instead of retracing your steps into the village, you find yourself drawn toward a narrow path winding behind the dome. It dips gradually downward, like an invitation whispered through the soft crunch of sand beneath your feet. The air takes on a slightly different character here, cooler, heavier, infused with a promise of something hidden just below the surface. You follow the slope, running a hand along the low wall that guides the descent. The clay feels smoother here, worn down by centuries of palms brushing against it during quiet nighttime visits. Lanterns, set at careful intervals, cast a golden hue that stretches along the walkway like a river of slow-moving fire. As you walk, the world above fades, the sounds of villagers chatting, goats mumbling, and wind moving over the rooftops all grow softer, more distant. The hush of the subterranean realm begins to take over. The path opens into a low-ceilinged tunnel with cool air washing gently over your face, as if greeting you personally. You breathe it in and feel an immediate drop in temperature, noticeable but not jarring. It's like stepping into the basement of a relative who has always insisted on keeping things brisk for preservation. You duck your head slightly, your footsteps echoing softly in the enclosed space. The tunnel curves downward, its walls narrowing just a bit before widening again into a chamber lit by small oil lamps flickering gently along the walls. This is one of the Connaught access points, a quiet, seldom visited part of the village's ancient water cooling system. You step inside, feeling the subtle shift in humidity against your skin. The floor emits a faint coolness even through your sandals, and you realize this space has been shaped carefully, intentionally, to hold on to every possible degree of chill. A mainstream historical fact nudges into your thoughts. Connaughts, these underground channels were one of ancient Persia's greatest engineering achievements, carrying water across long distances using nothing but gravity and clever tunneling. They brought mountain-cooled water into cities, farms, and yes, straight into ice houses like the one above you. You crouch slightly to look deeper into the tunnel, imagining the flow of water that once rushed beneath your feet, protected from sun and heat by layers of earth. Then comes a more unusual tidbit. Some Connaught workers, known as Mukanis, spent so much time underground that people joked they could navigate darkness better than cats. Their work was famously dangerous, digging and maintaining tunnels by candlelight or faint lamps, but also deeply respected. You glance down the tunnel and can practically feel the echoes of their footsteps, as if they're still somewhere farther ahead, mumbling about soil density and proper drainage. Historians still argue whether certain Connaught branches were intentionally designed to feed into yakhchals, or whether that became an adaptation over time. Some claim the cooling effect on ice storage was a happy accident. Others insist it was deliberate from the moment the first diagrams were drawn in the dust. As you trace your fingertips along the damp wall, you find yourself siding with both theories. The spaces feel too intentional to be coincidence. Yet, the desert has a way of teaching lessons slowly, shaping solutions over generations. You step farther into the chamber, feeling the ceiling press down gently, not claustrophobic, but intimate, like a quiet room built for whispered conversations. The lamplight trembles against the walls, revealing streaks of mineral buildup pale ribbons left behind by centuries of slow, patient water. You run your hand over one of the streaks. It feels slightly rough, cool, and ancient. You imagine this place being carved long before you were born, long before electricity, long before anyone decided to film sleepy YouTube videos about ice houses in the first place. In the chamber's corner, a shallow stone basin catches trickles of water seeping from the Connaught. You kneel beside it, dip your fingertips in, and feel the unmistakable chill. It's cold, not stick your tongue to a metal pole. Cold, but cold enough that it feels almost miraculous in a place that can fry eggs on rocks 9 months out of the year. The basin reflects the flickering lamplight, turning the surface into a trembling pool of gold. You rise and walk along the chamber's perimeter, noticing narrow vents cut strategically into the walls. These vents are like gentle inhalations and exhalations, breathing out warm air, drawing in cooler currents from the deeper Connaught tunnels. You put your hand in front of one vent and feel the soft whisper of air pass over your skin. It's a small sensation, but in the larger context, you can see how everything worked together. The Connaught's cooled water, the dome's insulating serruge, the vents channeling airflow. Thousands of tiny, thoughtful details forming one enormous silent refrigeration system. A quiet laugh slips from your lips 3 sections in, and you haven't yet encountered a single medieval Persian person shouting about how, back in my day, we built ice houses barefoot. Instead, the place seems full of calm practicality. You picture one of the builders leaning against a dome wall, sipping tea, and saying, "Yes, the desert wants you to melt, but we would prefer not to melt. Therefore, we build this." You continue deeper into the chamber, easing into a long, sloping corridor that seems to curl beneath the Yakhchal itself. The cool air intensifies gradually. Your sandals scuff lightly on the packed earth, your hands occasionally brushing the wall for balance. The corridor widens into a tall, vaulted space, directly beneath the storage pit you saw earlier. You crane your head upward, imagining the ice blocks that once rested right above, stacked in neat layers like frosty bricks of survival. The temperature here feels almost cave-like steady, unwavering, built for endurance. You inhale, feeling the coolness settle into your lungs. It's refreshing, calming, and somehow grounding. The air smells faintly metallic, probably due to centuries of mineral-rich water seeping and evaporating in this hidden world. You brush your fingertips across the wall again. The surface is smoother here, polished by time, maybe by workers leaning their shoulders against it during long nights spent tending the ice. You imagine a young apprentice, maybe someone about your height, sitting cross-legged right where you stand, adjusting straw insulation around a massive ice block. He'd tug it into place with quiet care, wipe his brow, and joke with another worker about how the desert sun could roast a camel in its sleep. And all the while, the Qanat water beneath them would murmur like a low lullaby. A sudden breeze moves upward through the chamber, carrying a chill that brushes your ankles like a shy cat greeting your arrival. It swirls once, then drifts upward toward the dome above. You follow its path with your eyes, watching dust motes dance in the lamplight. This whole place feels like a living organism breathing, cooling, preserving, waiting. As you turn to leave, climbing slowly back toward the surface, you feel the temperature rise with each step. The warm night air greets you like an old friend returning from an unplanned break. You stand again beneath the deep indigo sky, stars brightening overhead, the village quietly glowing in the distance. You take a slow breath. The desert's heat, the dome's coolness, and the underground hush all linger in your body at once. A layered experience, like slipping between worlds. And you continue forward, ready for the next discovery waiting in the night. You return to the village outskirts, guided by the faint glow of lanterns and the soft hush of night unfolding across the desert. The sky has deepened into a dark velvet dome speckled with stars so sharp and clear you feel like you could pluck one down and use it as a reading lamp. The air has cooled enough that your skin prickles pleasantly, grateful for the break from the daytime heat. And then you hear its subtle splashes, murmurs, the soft shuffle of sandaled feet. You follow the sounds until you come upon a wide, flat clearing where villagers gather around long, shallow stone pools carved into the earth. Moonlight washes over them, reflecting off their surfaces in bright shards. A few elders kneel at the edges, their hands guiding the water spread smooth as silk, completely focused despite the hour. You step closer, your sandals whispering against the sand, and immediately feel the temperature dip a little more. It's cooler here, open to the night sky, as though the land itself has unclenched. This is where the magic, or rather, the methodical science of nighttime ice making unfolds. You watch as villagers gently pour cool Qanat water into the stone basins. They work with a slow, practiced rhythm, smoothing the surface with wooden paddles so the water settles into a perfectly calm mirror. Your reflection wavers briefly on the surface, moonlit and slightly distorted, and you realize you're staring at the ancient Persian equivalent of an artisanal ice factory, minus the neon signs and questionable modern jingles. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Persians really did create ice by flooding shallow trays at night during winter, taking advantage of the desert's dramatic temperature swings. Even when daytime temperatures soared, winter nights could drop low enough to freeze thin sheets of water. The trick was making the layer thin water freezes faster. Spread it over a wide, shallow basin, keep it still, let the desert night do the rest. It's simple physics elevated into quiet craftsmanship. You watch the villagers finish leveling the water, their motions patient yet precise, as though they've done this hundreds of times. A boy sprinkles a bit of fine straw along one edge, meant to help with lifting the ice once it forms. His movements are careful, almost reverent. You can tell he's trying very hard not to mess up in front of the adults, and you silently root for him. He steps back, satisfied, brushing his hands on his tunic with the confidence of someone who has just accomplished the single most important straw sprinkle in human history. You shift slightly, listening to the murmured conversations around you. They talk in low voices about weather, about last season's ice yield, about how someone's goat keeps wandering into the melon patch. A woman chuckles softly as she adjusts her scarf. Another man stretches his back and mutters something about last winter being better, which might be the medieval Persian equivalent of complaining about how your favorite coffee shop changed its roast. You stroll along the edges of several basins, noting how each one reflects the sky in a slightly different way. The stars shimmer on the water's surface like scattered coins, and you watch the light ripple gently as a faint breeze stirs. You pause, savoring the contrast between the warm desert air and the cool water at your feet. It feels almost meditative. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. Some villages would hum or chant softly during the freezing process, believing the vibrations helped calm the water and prevent ripples that could ruin the ice formation. You listen closely, half expecting a chorus to start up. But here, the villagers rely on the stillness of the night itself. Maybe they've decided the desert is doing enough humming already. Or maybe it's late and no one wants to start a group performance that requires harmony. You crouch near the closest basin, leaning forward until your breath hovers just above the surface. You can practically feel the cold radiating upward as the water begins its slow transformation. The desert temperature is dropping, aided by the clear sky pulling heat upward into the night. You rub your arms gently, the coolness creeping pleasantly across your skin. The villagers wrap themselves in thicker layers, leaning into the breeze. Historians still argue whether certain basins were treated with special coatings to help ice release more easily, or whether simple stonework was sufficient. You look at the basin's surface as smooth, faintly glimmering with sediment, and think both possibilities make sense. Maybe some builders used natural oils before the first freeze. Maybe some relied purely on technique. And maybe your favorite theory, the villagers simply shrugged and said, "We'll figure it out," because that's how most human innovation begins. You wander a bit more, feeling the desert's night personality fully unfurl. The air remains quiet, broken only by the occasional soft laugh, a distant animal braying, or the faint sweep of wind gliding across sand. The sky looks impossibly clear, the stars crowded together in thick clusters that seem to pulse faintly. You tilt your head, letting the cosmos press down gently, wrapping you in its immensity. The basins, lined neatly in patterns that follow the land's natural slopes, begin to shimmer differently, not just with reflection, but with texture. You lean in and notice tiny curls of frost forming along the edges, delicate lines spreading inward like veins of silver. The villagers nod to one another, satisfied with the rapid cooling. You can't help yourself, you dip a finger very, very gently into one corner of a basin. The water is cold enough to sting just slightly, like sticking your hand into a freshly opened freezer. One of the villagers chuckles at your curiosity but says nothing, as if he's seen travelers poke water many times. You withdraw your hand quickly and shake it out, because even in medieval Persia, frostbite is not on tonight's agenda. You take a few steps back and observe how the villagers treat this whole process. There's no panic, no rushing, just a quiet respect for timing and temperature. They know the desert, know its moods, its nightly breath, its patterns. They move with the land rather than against it. You find yourself thinking about how many similar nights have unfolded here, how many winters have seen this ritual repeated, generation after generation, shaping a culture of patience and practical ingenuity. Another villager approaches carrying a small clay pot. He kneels beside a basin and gently pours something into the water. You ask him with your eyes, and he smiles, lifting the pot. It's just a pinch of dissolved salt used to encourage a cleaner freeze. Not enough to brine anything, just enough to coax the water into forming clearer sheets. You nod, appreciating the subtlety of the technique. The villagers gather at the edge of the clearing now, content to let the basins work their nighttime alchemy. The temperature continues to drop. The water grows still, glassy, perfectly reflecting the moon until a thin glaze of ice begins to claim the surface. It forms slowly, creeping across like a soft whisper of winter written on desert stone. You step back, fold your arms, and let the cool breeze brush your face as the first complete layer freezes firm. The villagers look pleased another night, another set of ice sheets forming. They won't harvest them until dawn, but already you feel the sense of accomplishment in the air. You stand there a long while, taking in the shimmering basins, the quiet smiles, the desert night working its magic above and below. For a moment, you think, if ancient refrigeration had a soundtrack, this would be it: the hush of wind, the silence of stars, the soft crackle of ice being born in the desert. The night deepens, the temperature steadies, and the basins gleam with fragile, perfect sheets of new ice. Dawn creeps in slowly, as if the sun is politely knocking before entering, and you feel the night loosen its grip on the desert. A faint gradient appears on the horizon's soft peach, bleeding into pale gold while the last of the stars fade like shy performers slipping backstage. You rub your hands together, partly to warm them, partly because you're about to witness a moment that feels almost ceremonial, the harvesting of the freeze. The villagers begin to gather again at the shallow basins, their silhouettes outlined in the early morning glow. They move with a practiced coordination that feels neither rushed nor sleepy, just steady, like they've slipped back into a familiar dance. Someone yawns deeply, stretching their arms wide enough to accidentally smack another villager on the shoulder. The second villager mutters something under his breath, and you're pretty sure it translates to, "I haven't had my morning tea yet. Please respect my personal space." You step closer to the nearest basin. The ice that formed overnight now rests as a thin, crystalline sheet, smooth, luminous, and surprisingly sturdy. You crouch down, seeing your warped reflection in the frosty gloss. The air is still cold enough that the edges sparkle a bit, holding on to the last strands of night. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Persians often harvested these thin sheets at dawn because timing mattered. Too early, and the ice was brittle. Too late, and the rising sun would weaken it. Midnight may have created the ice, but dawn decided its fate. And now, with the precision of people who've done this hundreds of times, villagers begin their delicate work. One elder kneels at the basin's far edge and gently taps the ice with a wooden paddle. A fine crack travels across the sheet, not loud, but resonant like a whispered, "Wake up." A young man follows behind, gripping the straw-lined edge and lifting carefully. The sheet rises with surprising ease, gleaming like a giant translucent tortilla. You almost make a joke about it, but the moment feels too peaceful to interrupt. Besides, you suspect the desert may not be ready for the concept of an ice burrito. The workers slide the sheet onto a long wooden board, where another villager trims the uneven edges with a small tool, creating neat slabs. Each trimmed piece looks like a chilled tile of winter, and you find yourself marveling at the simplicity of it. No machines, no generators, just physics, timing, and teamwork. A quirky tidbit nudges your memory. Some villages believed the first sheet harvested each year brought good luck, so they set it aside for ceremonial purposes, sometimes for cooling special drinks shared among the elders. You imagine them sipping an icy rose-water beverage, nodding solemnly, pretending not to brain freeze. The work continues smoothly. Slabs are lifted, carried, trimmed, and stacked on straw-lined carts. Someone whistles softly a tune so repetitive you suspect it's been whistled every winter for centuries. A few children scamper around gathering stray pieces of ice, marveling at them before dropping them into buckets. One kid pops a flake into his mouth and giggles, delighted. When he offers you a tiny shard, you accept it, placing it on your tongue. It tastes like nothing and everything. Cold, smooth, impossibly refreshing in a place where cold shouldn't exist. You watch as workers begin loading the fresh ice onto a small wooden sled like contraption, which, much to your amusement, is being dragged not by a donkey, but by three enthusiastic men who appear to be having a silent competition about who's contributing the most force. One of them slips slightly, catches himself, and immediately pretends it didn't happen. Their pride remains intact. Historians still argue whether transporting the ice by dawnlight was primarily strategic or simply convenient. Some claim villagers wanted to minimize melting by moving the sheets before the sun gathered strength. Others argue dawn was chosen because it marked the natural lull in nighttime chores. You lean toward the practical explanation the desert sun does not play around, but the beauty of the debate adds to the charm of this ancient practice. Shadow and light shift gently as the sun climbs. The village begins to stir. A few people step outside their homes, rubbing sleep from their eyes, watching the ice harvesting procession with quiet approval. You hear the faint clink of teacups coming from somewhere someone has clearly established early morning dominance. The workers haul the sled across the sand toward the nearest yakhchal. You follow behind, walking at an easy pace. The ice makes soft scraping sounds against the board, cushioned by straw bundles. You notice how carefully they protect the slabs from direct sunlight? They've draped cloth over the load, creating a shady pocket that preserves the precious chill. As you approach the Yakhchal, the towering dome casts its familiar cool shadow across the ground. The entrance is partly shaded and wide enough for two workers to enter side by side. They gather their tools, adjust their grips, and begin carrying the slabs inward. You step inside after them, feeling the temperature shift again steady, cool, almost sighing with relief as the ice enters its sanctuary. Inside, the workers climb down into the storage pit you saw earlier. They place each slab with gentle precision, layering them between padded bundles of straw. The pit echoes softly with their movements, the sounds bouncing up into the dome. You watch as the stack grows thin sheet upon thin sheet, building into a reservoir of future comfort. You lean against the wall, the clay cool beneath your palms, and take a slow breath. The air smells of straw, mineral dust, and a faint, lingering chill. You imagine the ice resting here for months, protected, treasured, waiting for the hottest days when it will be needed most. A soft laugh escapes you as you picture someone in the future bragging, "Oh yes, this ice? We harvested it by hand in the desert at dawn. No big deal." Meanwhile, modern folks struggle to keep ice trays from spilling on the walk from sink to freezer. Back outside, the workers return to gather the remaining slabs, and you lift your head toward the growing daylight. The sun has climbed enough to warm your face, but the memory of the icy air lingers pleasantly in your lungs. You feel balanced, caught between warmth and coolness, past and present, effort and ease. The final slab is placed into the yakhchal, and the workers wipe their brows, satisfied. Another night's harvest complete. Another quiet triumph carved out of desert conditions that should make ice impossible. You take one last look at the empty basins, now warming under dawn light. They'll be refilled at dusk, starting again the steady cycle of freezing, harvesting, storing a cycle that has shaped this community's rhythm for generations. You step away, letting the glow of early morning settle around you, the cool memory of the ice still fresh on your skin. You continue along the soft morning sands, the yakhchal standing quietly behind you as the sun begins to warm the desert air. The scene is peaceful, almost hypnotic, with long shadows stretching across the smooth, cooled ground. In the distance, small carts and baskets are being readied for transport, though today everything moves at a gentle, unhurried pace. You walk alongside a group of workers who handle ice with care, marveling at the simple elegance of their methods. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Ice from yakhchals was carefully stored and distributed to nearby villages, helping people preserve food and cool drinks during hot months. You imagine workers transferring ice into clay-lined trays, layering it with straw and cloth to slow melting. The process seems deliberate, each motion measured, almost meditative, emphasizing patience and craftsmanship over haste. You notice the small tools used for handling ice, wooden scoops, simple tongs, and clay molds, all designed to make the work more precise and efficient. A quirky detail drifts into your mind. Some ice blocks were marked with small symbols to indicate which village or household they were intended for. A charming system of organization that also reflects human ingenuity. Historians still debate whether these markings were purely practical or also had ceremonial significance, but their existence hints at a well-structured operation. The workers move in quiet harmony, their footsteps soft against the sandy paths. Occasionally, the ice is transferred into carts carefully lined with insulating materials, ready for short journeys to nearby homes or community stores. You take a moment to observe the flow of activity, the rhythm of lifting, layering, and transporting feeling, the calm efficiency of a system refined over centuries. As you follow the route, the landscape shifts. Low dunes give way to scattered desert vegetation, and you see irrigation channels glinting faintly in the morning light. The careful placement of yakhchals near water sources and accessible roads shows how thoughtfully these systems were integrated into daily life. A mainstream fact: these ice storage methods allowed people to maintain a small supply of fresh food and water, making summer life in the desert more manageable. You pause for a moment to watch the workers rest in the shade of a small stone wall. They exchange quiet gestures and smiles, a subtle acknowledgement of teamwork and shared knowledge. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some workers would hum simple melodies while moving ice, perhaps to keep pace or lighten the task, a gentle, humanizing detail that adds warmth to the scene. Historians still discuss whether these practices were common or occasional, but the image feels vivid and comforting. The path continues toward a low settlement where the ice will be used for everyday purposes. The carts move steadily, layered carefully with insulating materials to slow melting. You observe how the system operates quietly yet efficiently, bringing a small but meaningful relief to daily life. The rhythm of motion, the measured care, and the quiet ingenuity all combine into a gentle story of human adaptation, survival, and ingenuity. You walk with the traders a little longer until the paths begin to branch, one veering toward a larger town, another curling toward a garden estate, and a third stretching into a cluster of small settlements scattered across the shimmering horizon. You decide to break away from the group, following a tantalizing aroma wafting from the direction of the town. It's sweet, floral, and oddly cool, as if the desert itself were exhaling a soft, scented sigh. As you draw closer, you hear quiet chatter drifting from a modest, open-air stall shaded by a woven reed canopy. The space is busy enough to feel lively, but gentle enough not to disrupt the drowsy hum of morning. A few jars sit on the counter, each packed with thin noodles that look like translucent threads. Next to them stand bottles filled with pale rosewater, their corks wrapped in tightly knotted twine. The stall owner, a cheerful woman with sleeves rolled up to her elbows, is carefully chipping at a block of ice with a small copper tool. Tiny shards scatter into a clay bowl, glistening like fragile jewels. You've arrived at a small but bustling hub of early sweet treat creation, where people gather to craft and taste some of the earliest forms of faluda. The mood is festive in a calm sort of way, like a community that knows dessert is not something to rush. The stall owner glances up, catches your eye, and waves you closer with a welcoming gesture that says, "Yes, you look like someone in need of cold dessert before noon." A mainstream historical fact flows through your thoughts. Falude is among the world's oldest frozen desserts, with origins tracing back to ancient Persia, where ice harvested in yakhchals was mixed with starch noodles and flavored with syrups. The version in front of you looks simple but elegant, thin, chilled strands resting in a sweet, icy cradle. The stall owner hands you a small bowl with a smile. You dip the spoon into the mixture, watching the noodles slip effortlessly through the frosty slush. The first taste is soft and delicate, a dance of coolness and rosewater perfume, subtle enough to feel calming, but interesting enough to keep you curious. The chill spreads gently across your tongue, and you feel your shoulders drop in relaxation. The heat of the desert seems to step aside respectfully. The woman tells you the faluda is freshly made, its syrup crafted from rose petals gathered at dawn. She flicks her wrist in a practiced motion, adding just a few drops of lime juice from a clay cruet. For balance, she says. You didn't realize your dessert needed emotional balance, but she was absolutely right. Nearby, two elderly men are deeply engaged in an intense debate over whose grandmother invented the superior method of mixing the noodles. One claims his family's syrup was heated with saffron. The other insists the trick is whispering a blessing over the pot. Their argument is spirited but soft, more like two cats pawing gently at a rug than an actual fight. You suspect both grandmothers were legends in their own ways. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some recipes for early Persian iced treats included tiny amounts of ground mastic resin, giving the mixture a faintly chewy texture. That detail makes you scan the dessert more closely. Sure enough, you detect a very slight bounce to the noodles, just enough to make you feel like the dessert has personality. Other villagers drift in and out, leaving coins, stories, and laughter. One mother buys 2 bowls for her children, who immediately start slurping with utter abandon. One child tries to race the melting ice by eating faster, nearly giving himself a self-inflicted brain freeze. He pauses dramatically, eyes widening, then groans the universal sound of, "I regret everything." His sister cackles without mercy. You linger at the stall, watching how every small action brings together ingredients, effort, and a little bit of magic. The woman refills her ice basin with fresh shavings from a newly delivered block, explaining how the ice must be chipped gently so the dessert stays fluffy, not watery. She points to a jar of rose petals drying in the corner and tells you that the scent is stronger if the petals are gathered before the sun fully rises. Historians still argue whether faluda began as a practical way to stretch the usefulness of ice, or whether it was always intended as a special treat for celebrations and gatherings. You consider both theories while savoring another spoonful. It feels too delightful to be merely practical, yet too simple to be exclusively ceremonial. Like many culinary inventions, it probably grew from both necessity and joy, blending into tradition over generations. A small group of travelers arrives next, dusty from their journey. The stall owner greets them warmly and begins preparing several bowls at once, her movements rhythmic and light. You watch as she uses a long-handled tool to pull the starch noodles from a cooling vessel, the strands looping gracefully like silk threads. She folds them into the shaved ice, pours the syrup in thin, shiny ribbons, and hands the bowls out one by one. One traveler asks if she has a version made with sour cherry syrup. She shakes her head, laughing, and points him toward a nearby stall where an older man sits beneath a long, faded awning. Apparently, he is the syrup elder, a man who has supposedly perfected 100 variations of fruit syrups, at least according to his own marketing strategy. The traveler jogs over eagerly, and you can't help noticing how many locals shake their heads with affectionate amusement. The syrup elder waves dramatically, as if greeting an adoring crowd. You make a mental note not to make direct eye contact unless you want to hear every syrup fact known to humanity. As you finish your bowl, the stall owner asks quietly if the dessert reminded you of home. Something about the question feels timeless, maybe because we all connect childhood memories to treats, textures, and temperatures. You tell her it feels both new and familiar, like meeting a cousin you didn't know you had. She beams. Around you, the market gradually becomes livelier, the sun climbing higher but still held at bay by the shade of canopies and the cooling presence of ice. More people arrive seeking refreshment. A man leading goats with tinkling bells, a potter carrying his wares, a group of youths who claim they're only buying faluda for research purposes. The stall owner raises an eyebrow they crumble instantly and buy 2 bowls each. You hand your empty bowl back with quiet gratitude and step away, still savoring the lingering sweetness on your tongue. The world feels slower, softer, and somehow cooler after sharing in this ritual of early frozen delights. You glance back once more at the bustling stall, watching ice transform into joy under the hands of someone who treats the process like an art. With that small moment of comfort settling into your chest, you turn toward the road again, ready to wander deeper into the world shaped by this remarkable desert invention. The road stretches before you now, dust curling gently in the soft breeze, carrying whispers of past footsteps and the faint scent of crushed herbs from the scrubby desert plants. You trudge along beside a narrow irrigation channel, its water gleaming in the morning sun like a silver ribbon laid carefully across the sands. It's a quiet reminder that life persists here in clever, patient ways. Every channel, every small grove of date palms speaks of ingenuity harnessed to the environment of people learning to thrive rather than simply survive. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind as you walk. Persian ice houses often relied on natural water channels to keep the surrounding environment cool, feeding the basins where ice would form and eventually be stored. You imagine workers filling shallow pools with water in the evening, letting it freeze overnight under the crisp desert sky, then carefully transferring the ice into the yakhchal by daybreak. You can almost hear the gentle scrape of wooden paddles and the clink of ice blocks settling into place. Curiously, some yakhchals also incorporated wind catchers or badgers, channeling subtle breezes to aid in preservation. You tilt your head toward the nearest tower rising above a distant village, imagining it catching the wind just so, funneling cool air downward into the storage chambers. Historians still argue whether these towers primarily functioned as passive refrigeration or if their significance was more ceremonial, a visual testament to architectural ingenuity. Either way, the engineering itself inspires a sense of wonder that quietly hums in your chest. As you walk, you notice a small cluster of wildflowers clinging to the banks of the channel, their petals trembling softly in the breeze. Their delicate beauty is an understated contrast to the imposing, methodical structures of the Yakhchal, reminding you that human innovation never exists in isolation. Life, both fragile and resilient, cohabits alongside engineering marvels if one is patient enough to notice. A quirky tidbit drifts to the forefront. Some yakhchals were rumored to house tiny, ornamental fish in the shallow pools to bring luck to the ice, a superstition that may have helped workers feel a connection to their daily labor. You smile at the image of miniature carp quietly swimming beneath the slabs, possibly the first example of ice house feng shui. The soft crunch of sand underfoot is interrupted by a distant laugh, a child chasing a rolling gourd across the path. You watch, momentarily transported by the simplicity of play. The child pauses, bends down, and shakes the gourd, delighting in the hollow, rolling sound. Nearby, an elderly woman watches with mild exasperation, but you detect a hint of pride in her gaze, another quiet celebration of life's rhythms. Soon, you arrive at the outskirts of a small village where walls of mud brick homes catch the sun in muted oranges and browns. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys, the scent of cooking bread mixing with the faint aroma of crushed herbs. You follow a narrow alley that leads to a modest yakhchal tucked between two homes. Its conical roof rises gracefully above the mud walls, the surface rough but symmetrical, a quiet monument to centuries of ingenuity. Inside, you are met with a familiar chill that feels almost otherworldly after the desert's warmth. Workers move with careful precision, layering straw and shifting ice blocks into channels. You notice subtle patterns carved into the ice stripes, zigzags, perhaps a playful signature left by someone long ago. A mainstream fact nudges your thoughts. Yakhchals were often used to store food, medicine, and ice for ceremonial occasions, giving them a versatile purpose beyond simple cooling. You watch a young apprentice gently place a block of ice atop a stack, nodding as an elder gives quiet approval. The apprentice wipes sweat from his brow, and you see the quiet satisfaction of mastery, a small, steady pride that comes from doing a delicate job well. A quirky tidbit surfaces again. Some records suggest workers would whisper good wishes to the ice before storing it, believing positivity improved its longevity, a charming if unprovable ritual that softens the labor. The conversation around you is low and calm, punctuated by the occasional clink of ice and the shuffling of straw mats. Historians still argue whether these small rituals were purely superstitious or served a subtle psychological function, helping workers synchronize their efforts and maintain patience through repetitive labor. Either way, you feel their rhythm, a gentle, measured cadence that almost lulls you forward into its quiet tempo. With the afternoon sun tilting ever so slightly, the Yakhchal's interior glows with the soft interplay of light and shadow. You notice dust motes dancing lazily in the slanted beams, each one catching the chill in a delicate, almost magical way. The temperature difference is subtle but profound, a reminder that human ingenuity can bend even the natural extremes of the environment into something soothing. You take a deep breath, letting the cool, slightly damp air fill your lungs. Each inhale feels like a soft exhalation of desert heat, each step forward an intimate brush with centuries of methodical care. Here, in this quiet moment, the world outside the walls seems less urgent. Everything, for now, is in balance. The sun, the sand, the ice, and your own heartbeat sinking slowly with the rhythm of human ingenuity. As you leave the Yakhchal, the sun has dipped slightly lower, casting long, honey-colored shadows across the desert floor. The air carries a subtle crispness now, a gentle reprieve from the day's heat, as if the earth itself sighs in preparation for evening. You continue down the winding path, where soft sand cushions your footsteps and the occasional tumbleweed rolls lazily by. Each step feels measured, a slow cadence that matches the rhythm of your own breathing. In the distance, you notice a small grove of pomegranate trees, their branches bending gracefully under the weight of glossy red fruit. You wander closer, and the scent of ripe pomegranates drifts towards you sweet, slightly tart, and faintly earthy. Picking a fruit, you feel the textured skin yield beneath your fingers, a tactile reminder of the bounty these carefully tended gardens provide. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Persians have cultivated pomegranates for thousands of years, often pairing them with ice and syrup in early desserts. You can almost imagine the crisp, icy faluda tasting faintly of pomegranate juice, the coolness heightened by the fruit's gentle acidity. Nearby, a small boy balances on a low wall, pretending his stick is a spear as he navigates imaginary battles. He wobbles and stumbles, catching himself with a laugh that mingles with the soft hum of the breeze. The scene is so ordinary, yet timeless it could have happened 1,000 years ago, and it could happen tomorrow. You smile, recognizing how daily life intertwines seamlessly with extraordinary invention. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some Persian gardeners would bury small clay vessels filled with ice beneath pomegranate trees to keep roots cool during sweltering summers, a practice both practical and charmingly inventive. You glance around, imagining these miniature ice chambers hidden beneath the soil, quietly doing their work, much like invisible guardians of the orchard. Historians still argue whether this technique was widespread or limited to affluent estates, but the idea alone feels wonderfully intimate, a secret shared between nature and human ingenuity. Continuing down the path, you come across a low stone bridge spanning a narrow irrigation channel. Water trickles gently beneath it, glinting as the sun reflects off its surface. You pause, tracing the ripples with your eyes, fascinated by how these channels form an unassuming yet vital network connecting villages, gardens, and ice houses. The sound of flowing water is hypnotic, each gentle gurgle a soft percussion that slows your thoughts further, easing the mind toward rest. Beyond the bridge, the path curves into a shaded grove where workers tend a small herd of goats. Their bells tinkle with an almost musical quality, a calm counterpoint to the gurgling water and rustling leaves. You notice one particularly playful kid darting between the others, narrowly avoiding a slow-moving adult goat. Its antics are both amusing and oddly meditative, a reminder that even in purposeful labor, there is room for whimsy. You approach a mud brick home nestled among the trees. The family inside is busy with evening routines preparing food, tending to small fires sweeping the courtyard. You linger nearby, watching quietly. A mainstream historical fact: Persian homes often featured central courtyards that provided shade, airflow, and a communal gathering space, a clever integration of architecture and daily life. You imagine the soft clatter of clay pots, the gentle aroma of simmering stews, the cool drafts circulating from the courtyard to interior rooms. A quirky anecdote comes to mind. Some households would hang small pieces of ice from wooden beams to slightly chill their meals before serving, an inventive method reminiscent of the larger yakhchal system. You chuckle at the idea, picturing tiny ice ornaments dangling above plates of rice and stews. Historians still argue whether this practice was ceremonial or purely practical, but it seems likely it was both a subtle blending of comfort and ingenuity. Night begins to settle, and the temperature drops noticeably. You notice the subtle shimmer of stars appearing in the sky, their reflection mirrored faintly in the irrigation channel. The combination of twinkling lights, gentle water sounds, and distant goat bells creates a quiet symphony, a natural lullaby designed for easing into rest. You take a slow breath, feeling the rhythm of life in this desert village, each small act gardening, herding, tending ice, woven together like a delicate tapestry. A soft wind brushes your cheek as you continue along the path, carrying the scent of herbs and earth, a calming reminder of nature's constancy. You consider the yakhchal and the ice, the gardens and goats, the children and stars, all small details forming a coherent, serene ecosystem. Historians still argue whether these systems were the pinnacle of early Persian engineering or the product of gradual communal experimentation. Either way, the ingenuity and simplicity of it all feel quietly miraculous, like a gentle invitation to pause and breathe. You pause one final time before leaving the grove, taking in the full scene: sun slipping lower, water murmuring, goats resting, trees swaying softly, and ice hidden beneath earth and stone, working its silent magic. You feel a slow, deep calm settle through your body, a quiet acknowledgement of both human effort and nature's generosity. It's a perfect moment to simply be walking in tandem with history's slow, deliberate rhythm. The night has deepened, and the desert feels expansive, quiet, and almost velvet-like under the soft glow of the moon. You walk along a narrow, winding track where the sand has cooled beneath your feet, leaving a faint impression of each careful step. The air carries a subtle, earthy scent, blending faint traces of crushed herbs, distant smoke, and the lingering aroma of baked bread from nearby villages. Each inhale seems to slow your heartbeat, matching the measured pace of your journey. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you move. Medieval Persian ice houses were often constructed with thick mud brick walls to insulate against both heat and cold, a design that allowed them to maintain freezing temperatures even during scorching summers. You imagine yourself brushing your hand along the smooth, warm exterior of such a structure, marveling at how something so simple, made of earth and skill, could perform such an advanced function. The thought is strangely comforting, like discovering a hidden guardian quietly working on your behalf. Curiously, some ice houses incorporated subterranean storage spaces that extended several meters below ground, forming cool labyrinths that protected ice from melting. You picture yourself ducking into one of these chambers, the air instantly chilling your skin, and the dim interior glowing faintly from ambient moonlight filtering through tiny ventilation shafts. Historians still argue whether the subterranean networks were standardized across regions or adapted uniquely to each village's topography and climate. But either way, the ingenuity involved is undeniable. As you continue, you notice a small cluster of desert shrubs, their leaves glimmering faintly in moonlight. A delicate insect buzzes past, its wings catching the silver sheen, and you realize how attentive observation can make the simplest of details feel alive. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some Persian villagers would hang small, reflective ornaments near ice house entrances, believing the light would protect ice from invisible spirits, a charming ritual that likely helped workers maintain focus and patience. You smile, imagining a row of tiny, glittering talismans swaying gently in the night breeze. The path now narrows, bordered by low stone walls that guide you toward a small settlement nestled in a valley. You can see faint lights flickering from mud brick homes, smoke curling into the night sky. Children's laughter floats softly from courtyards, their games echoing like gentle music against the desert stillness. You note how life seems to embrace both work and leisure with equal grace, an unhurried rhythm that the modern mind rarely experiences. A mainstream historical fact surfaces as you approach the village. Ice from yakhchals was not just for cooling food, but also for medicinal purposes, preserving herbs and cooling remedies in the heat of summer. You imagine an herbalist carefully layering crushed ice around medicinal syrups, humming softly as she works, ensuring that the remedies remain fresh and potent. The subtle interplay between practical science and cultural ritual is remarkable, showing an intuitive understanding of preservation that resonates across centuries. Nearby, you observe a courtyard where women are arranging trays of fresh herbs and fruits on shallow mats, their movements precise yet leisurely. The faint scent of mint and rose petals mingles in the air. A quirky tidbit floats to the surface. Some women reportedly use crushed ice from yakhchals as a gentle skincare treatment, an early natural approach to cooling and refreshing the skin under the desert Sunday. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or isolated to wealthier households, but you appreciate the ingenuity regardless. You step closer to the Yakhchal's entrance, where the faint clink of ice can still be heard, a soft, hypnotic sound against the desert night. The moonlight bathes the conical structure in silvery hues, highlighting the subtle curves and imperfections of the mud brick surface. There is something quietly majestic about the building, a testament to human patience, observation, and trial and error engineering. As you wander past the structure, your attention is caught by small animals, desert foxes, jerboas, and lizards moving carefully in the shadows. The nocturnal life is abundant, yet unobtrusive, blending seamlessly with human activity. You feel a gentle connection between the ecosystem, human innovation, and survival strategies, a reminder that even in isolation, everything exists in a harmonious balance. A soft wind rises, carrying the faint hum of distant water channels and the whisper of leaves. You pause to listen, feeling the cool night air wrap around you like a soft blanket. The subtle intermingling of temperature, scent, and sound forms an invisible symphony, perfectly tuned to lull both mind and body. Historians still argue whether the placement of yakhchals was primarily strategic for resource access or also influenced by aesthetic and cultural considerations. Either way, you feel the calm certainty of purpose embedded in every stone and block. Your steps eventually take you to a low hill overlooking the settlement. From here, you can see the yakhchal's roof rising gracefully, the water channels glittering faintly, and clusters of homes resting peacefully. The desert's expanse stretches beyond, endless and quiet, as if time itself slows in this gentle embrace of night. You breathe deeply, feeling a profound connection to the ingenuity and care that allowed life and ice to thrive here for centuries. The desert night deepens as you descend the hill, each step sinking slightly into the cool, soft sand. The air is calm, carrying a faint scent of evening dew mingled with crushed herbs from distant gardens. Somewhere nearby, a small stream gurgles softly, its rhythm a gentle percussion that complements the distant tinkle of goat bells and faint murmur of villagers preparing for rest. You notice the delicate shadow of a single palm stretching across the sand, and you pause, letting the tranquility settle around you. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your awareness. The Persian Yakhchal system was often part of a larger network of agricultural planning, including irrigation channels, orchards, and gardens, all designed to optimize both cooling and food storage. You can almost trace the invisible map of these systems, imagining water traveling through carefully leveled channels, feeding orchards while cooling the shallow ice pools before the ice blocks were harvested. The sheer thoughtfulness of this interwoven design seems almost meditative, a kind of slow poetry built from bricks, water, and sunlight. Curiously, some yakhchals had domed ceilings coated with reflective plaster to reduce heat absorption, a subtle engineering trick that magnified the efficiency of the system. Historians still argue whether these coatings were purely functional or carried aesthetic significance, intended to demonstrate status as well as ingenuity. Either way, you marvel at the careful attention paid to material, design, and environment, a harmony of utility and artistry. You wander closer to a small cluster of mud brick homes, noticing the subtle glow of oil lamps flickering through low windows. Smoke curls lazily from tiny chimneys, carrying the faint, sweet scent of baking bread. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some households placed small ice blocks near sleeping areas to cool the room slightly, an early form of nocturnal comfort. You chuckle softly, imagining villagers tucking themselves beneath thin blankets, listening to the quiet hiss of ice slowly melting, providing relief from the desert heat in the simplest, most practical way. As you continue along the narrow alley, you hear the faint clatter of a clay pot being set down. You peek into a courtyard where a woman arranges herbs and ice in a shallow basin, murmuring quietly to herself. Perhaps she believes the ice carries a blessing, or perhaps it's merely a comforting ritual. Historians still argue the precise motivations. Either way, the scene feels timeless, a quiet intersection of human need, intuition, and patience. You stroll past a garden where date palms sway gently in the night breeze, their leaves rustling softly. Between the trunks, small channels of water reflect the starlight, rippling ever so slightly. A mainstream fact: some date orchards were intentionally planted near yakhchals, the cooled air helping extend fruit shelf life, an early example of microclimate management. You can almost feel the air temperature dipping subtly as you walk beneath the palms, a whisper of how architecture and horticulture intertwined. A playful detail surfaces. Workers sometimes use straw to cover the ice blocks, not just for insulation, but also to mark the harvest date or even doodle simple symbols, a lighthearted reminder that human labor has always carried personal touches, even within practical systems. You smile at the thought of tiny straw signatures, the past hinting at both function and whimsy. Moving further, you notice the faint glimmer of a distant fire where villagers have gathered. The conversation is low and soft, punctuated by laughter, clinking dishes, and the gentle scrape of feet on sand. The combination of sounds is oddly hypnotic, each note contributing to a soothing rhythm that slows your thoughts, encouraging a reflective calm. Historians still debate whether these gatherings served purely social purposes or also reinforced shared knowledge about agricultural techniques and ice management. You suspect it was likely both. The moon has risen higher now, casting the Yakhchal's dome in pale, almost silver light. The shadows it casts across the sand and surrounding homes feel fluid, shifting slowly like the gentle undulations of water. You pause, leaning against a low stone wall, feeling the quiet pulse of history seep into your bones. The soft creak of a wind catcher in the distance adds another layer to this nocturnal symphony, a reminder that even structures breathe in their own way. As you take a slow breath, you notice the interplay of all these elements: the cooled air of the Yakhchal, the reflective plaster of the dome, the irrigation channels, the orchards, the soft sounds of human life, and nocturnal animals. Everything seems deliberately intertwined, each piece supporting the next in a quiet, patient system honed over centuries. You let yourself sink into the rhythm of it all, each inhalation a soft acknowledgement of ingenuity, each exhale a gentle relaxation into history's gentle embrace. The night wind rises just enough to bring a faint fragrance of crushed mint and rose petals. You inhale deeply, feeling the desert's cool, fragrant breath mix with the memory of ice, water, and mud brick walls. The Yakhchal stands quietly in the moonlight, a sentinel of calm, a reminder that human ingenuity, patience, and a touch of whimsy can coexist beautifully, even in the harshest environments. You wander farther into the desert night, leaving the soft murmur of the village behind. The sand beneath your feet has cooled completely, offering a gentle, almost velvety cushion for each step. Stars scatter across the sky in intricate patterns, glimmering faintly above distant mountain ridges. The moon has climbed higher, casting silver shadows across the landscape. You feel a quiet expansiveness here, a gentle sense of scale that stretches both the imagination and the senses, reminding you how small and yet significant these human achievements can be. A mainstream historical fact floats into your awareness. Yakhchals were designed not only for ice storage, but also for preserving perishable food, including fruits, dairy, and occasionally meat, which allowed Persian communities to survive and thrive through long, hot summers. You imagine baskets of fresh dates or creamy yogurt carefully nestled around ice blocks, kept cool for days or even weeks. The simplicity and elegance of such a system are astonishing. A quiet testament to human ingenuity honed over centuries of observation and trial. Curiously, some yakhchals incorporated channels that collected runoff from nearby roofs, feeding both the ice storage and surrounding gardens. Historians still argue whether this system was standardized or varied widely depending on regional rainfall and village size, but the principle of maximizing resources feels universal. You picture water flowing gently along these channels, glinting like liquid silver under the moonlight, each droplet performing its small, vital work. You pause near a low dune, noticing a cluster of small desert flowers that seem almost luminescent in the moonlight. Their petals are delicate, folding inward as if acknowledging the night's cool embrace. A quirky detail surfaces. Some local legends suggest villagers would sprinkle melted ice water on these flowers before sleep, believing it encouraged restful dreams, a whimsical tradition that blends practicality with folklore. You smile at the thought, imagining small hands gently tending to these blossoms as night settles. Continuing, you come across a low earthen wall partially covered in creeping vines. The soft rustle of leaves is punctuated by the distant hum of nocturnal insects. A mainstream historical fact: many yakhchal constructions included ventilation shafts designed to create natural airflow, cooling the ice without mechanical assistance, an early and ingenious form of passive climate control. You run your fingers along the rough brick surface, sensing the subtle texture of centuries-old craftsmanship. Nearby, a small family tends a few chickens near their courtyard. The birds cluck softly as they move through shallow dust, their movements slow and unhurried. A quirky tidbit drifts to the surface. Some households use leftover ice chips to cool drinking water for chickens during the hottest afternoons, a subtle but thoughtful detail that reflects the pervasive care given to both humans and animals alike. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or reserved for wealthier families, but the image feels delightfully plausible. You continue along a narrow path that eventually leads to a small oasis. Palms sway gently over a quiet pool of water that reflects the starry sky like a polished mirror. You step closer and hear the gentle lap of water against stones, each ripple a soft percussion in the otherwise tranquil night. You pause, watching tiny insects skim the surface, their movements almost imperceptible, yet mesmerizing. The oasis seems like a hidden gem, a quiet sanctuary sustained by careful planning and patient maintenance. As you walk along the edge of the water, you notice faint markings in the sand tracks from foxes, jerboas, and perhaps a wandering camel. Each track tells a story of life continuing quietly alongside human ingenuity. You take a deep breath, absorbing the subtle interplay of natural rhythm and constructed order. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Some Yakhchal systems were intentionally sited near oases or underground aquifers to ensure a constant water supply, blending natural geography with human design in ways that feel almost effortless. The gentle moonlight casts the Yakhchal silhouette against the horizon. Its conical shape rises from the sand like a quiet sentinel, the reflective plaster shimmering faintly in the silver glow. You imagine the workers of centuries past, carefully layering mud bricks, shaping ventilation shafts, and stacking ice blocks with deliberate patience. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Workers occasionally decorated the interior domes with simple geometric patterns, perhaps to mark ice levels or simply for visual pleasure, a subtle human touch that transforms a functional space into something quietly beautiful. The cool night air brushes against your face as you continue your journey. You notice a faint breeze carrying the scent of herbs, crushed soil, and distant fires. The intermingling of sound, scent, and temperature creates a serene, almost hypnotic atmosphere. Historians still argue whether the specific placement of yakhchals followed strict engineering principles or evolved organically through communal knowledge and trial and error, but the harmony is evident nonetheless. You pause on a gentle rise overlooking the oasis, the yakhchal, and scattered homes. The scene is breathtaking in its simplicity, human ingenuity, seamlessly blending with the natural environment. You take a slow, steady breath, feeling the rhythm of life here, where ice, water, food, and community exist in quiet balance. The gentle desert night seems to cradle both history and imagination, inviting you to linger in its calm. The night has grown even softer now, with the desert air carrying a subtle chill that brushes against your skin. Each step across the sand feels weightless, almost as if you are gliding along the surface. The distant mountains stand like silent guardians, their jagged silhouettes softened by moonlight. Somewhere beyond, the faint calls of nocturnal birds mix with the whispering of the wind through sparse vegetation. The world feels suspended in a gentle, measured stillness, as though time itself has slowed to accommodate the quiet pulse of history. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you move closer to the Yakhchal once more. The storage and management of ice often involved communal labor, with entire villages coordinating harvest, stacking, and maintenance, a system that required trust, cooperation, and patience. You imagine the soft shuffle of feet on sand and stone, the careful placement of each ice block, and the low murmurs of conversation punctuated by laughter. The process seems almost ritualistic, a collective choreography designed to ensure survival and comfort during the relentless summer months. Curiously, some yakhchals featured small niches along their interior walls where herbs or fruits could be stored separately from the ice blocks, preventing unwanted flavors or odors from mingling. Historians still argue whether this practice was standard or optional, but the attention to detail hints at a sophisticated understanding of preservation that feels remarkably modern in its logic. You wander closer to a courtyard illuminated by the flickering glow of oil lamps. Shadows dance across walls, creating an interplay of light and darkness that is soothing and hypnotic. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some villagers would carve simple patterns into the ice itself before storage, turning each block into a fleeting work of art, ephemeral decorations that vanished as the ice slowly melted. You imagine these tiny geometric carvings, catching the faint lamplight before disappearing into the cool air, a gentle reminder that beauty often exists alongside utility. A gentle breeze carries the scent of crushed herbs and faint traces of cooking fires. You pass by a small garden where water trickles through channels, feeding palms and small fruit trees. A mainstream fact: these gardens often benefited from the cooled microclimate created by the Yakhchal, allowing crops to flourish even in harsh summer heat, an early example of integrated environmental engineering. You pause, tracing the path of a small irrigation channel, watching the way water catches the moonlight, creating subtle, dancing reflections across the soil. Nearby, a group of villagers moves quietly, tending to small tasks before settling in for the night. The soft shuffle of feet and low murmur of voices blend seamlessly with the natural sounds of the desert. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some ice harvesters would hum softly or recite gentle rhymes while stacking ice, perhaps to synchronize movement or simply to pass time. A human touch that transforms labor into a quiet, almost meditative ritual. Historians still argue whether this was purely functional or a cultural tradition, but the image feels perfectly plausible. The Yakhchal's dome rises silently in the moonlight, its conical silhouette perfectly proportioned and timeless. You walk along its base, feeling the subtle coolness radiating from the mud bricks. The reflective plaster glimmers faintly, revealing tiny imperfections that speak to the hands that shaped each brick centuries ago. You imagine the workers pausing to admire their work, perhaps exchanging a quiet joke about how stubborn the mud could be, or marveling at how ice, water, and earth had been coaxed into harmony. The desert's nocturnal creatures continue their gentle routines: foxes sniffing through dunes, jerboas hopping quietly, and insects buzzing with a soft, persistent rhythm. The interplay of life, human ingenuity, and environmental awareness feels complete, as if each element exists in deliberate, balanced connection. You breathe deeply, feeling the calm settle into your chest, matching the slow, steady pulse of history that surrounds you. As you gaze one last time at the Yakhchal and the gently lit village, you sense the enduring presence of human patience and care. The quiet harmony between architecture, climate, and daily life unfolds like a gentle lullaby, inviting you to reflect on the subtle genius embedded in simple acts: stacking ice, channeling water, tending gardens, and observing the rhythms of nature. Historians still argue whether Yakhchal placement favored strategic, climatic, or social considerations, but the result remains indisputably serene. You let yourself sink into this tableau, feeling a deep sense of connection with the countless hands and minds that shaped this landscape. Every brick, every channel, every ice block carries a story, quietly whispering the ingenuity, humor, and care of those who lived here long before your footsteps touched the sand. The night has softened to its most delicate whisper. The moon hangs low, casting a silver glow that blurs the lines between sand, stone, and the distant silhouettes of palm fronds. The air is pleasantly cool now, carrying faint traces of herbs, mud, and the subtle sweetness of desert flora. Every step you take feels slower, almost ceremonial, as if the desert itself has asked you to pause and move gently. You notice the Yakhchal ahead, rising like a quiet monument, its dome reflecting moonlight in gentle, undulating patterns. There is a profound serenity here, one that invites you to linger and breathe slowly, taking in the architecture, the history, and the soft cadence of the night. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. Yakhchals were often strategically built on elevated ground or near wind paths to maximize natural airflow, ensuring ice would remain cool despite rising desert temperatures. You imagine the architects, centuries ago, meticulously observing the wind, the sun, and the sand, plotting each structure with patience that feels almost meditative. The elegance of this knowledge, passed from master to apprentice over generations, is a quiet reminder of human ingenuity tuned to the rhythms of nature. Curiously, some yakhchals had internal staircases or ramps, allowing workers to move ice blocks down safely without risk of melting, a thoughtful integration of human ergonomics into ancient engineering. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of ramps was a standardized innovation or depended on local preference, but the image of careful, deliberate movement lingers in your mind. You wander around the base of the dome, noting the way moonlight plays across its reflective plaster. The texture feels almost alive under your fingertips, a mosaic of tiny imperfections that speak to centuries of handcrafting. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some yakhchals were rumored to have secret compartments or small niches for storing rare herbs or sweets, perhaps an early form of surprise or delight within functional design. You chuckle quietly, imagining the playful curiosity of someone discovering a hidden stash of fragrant treats long ago. The surrounding desert hums softly, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream, the faint shuffle of nocturnal creatures. A mainstream fact: villagers often time their ice harvests according to lunar phases, using the coolest nights to preserve the maximum amount of ice, demonstrating an intimate understanding of natural cycles. You feel the subtle ebb and flow of lunar influence in the gentle coolness brushing your skin. You move toward the small oasis nearby, its water reflecting stars like a dark, liquid mirror. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Children were sometimes allowed to play near the ice channels under supervision, making tiny ice boats or floating leaves, small joys tucked quietly into the rhythms of labor and survival. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or anecdotal, but the image of laughter mingling with the hush of ice melting feels entirely fitting. The night deepens further. You pause to observe the entire village from a low dune, taking in the softly lit homes, winding irrigation channels, gently swaying palms, and the stoic yakhchal at the center. Each element exists in harmonious balance, a testament to centuries of careful planning, observation, and ingenuity. The human touch is everywhere, evident, yet unobtrusive, like a soft heartbeat beneath the desert's calm. You take a slow breath, letting the tranquility seep into your chest and limbs. The rhythm of history here is gentle, deliberate, almost hypnotic. Every stone, every channel, every ice block contributes to an orchestrated quietude, a lullaby written in mud, water, and careful human hands. The Yakhchal stands as both protector and storyteller, whispering secrets of survival, patience, and ingenuity to anyone willing to linger and listen. The desert air wraps around you, a soft, steady embrace. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the cool interior of the Yakhchal, the gentle hum of water channels, and the low laughter of long-ago villagers. You sense the unity of architecture, environment, and human ingenuity, a calm network of thoughtful design that transcends centuries. Historians still debate the exact motivations for certain features, but the emotional resonance is undeniable, an enduring calm etched into every brick and breeze. As you settle on the sand, you feel the desert's quiet pulse align with your own heartbeat. You notice the soft fragrance of night-blooming flowers, the faint hiss of ice slowly melting, and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. The Yakhchal rises before you, timeless, serene, a monument to ingenuity and patience. You breathe slowly, letting your thoughts drift gently across time and space, embracing the soothing rhythm of history. The night stretches on in gentle, unbroken calm. The moonlight softens further, smoothing the harsh outlines of the sand dunes and painting the village in a silvery haze. The Yakhchal stands quietly, its dome reflecting the soft lunar glow, a sentinel that has watched centuries unfold. You breathe in slowly, feeling the cool desert air fill your lungs, carrying the faint scents of crushed herbs, distant fires, and the soft fragrance of night-blooming flowers. The rhythms of human life, long ago. Mingle in your mind with the stillness of nature, forming a delicate harmony that seems to exist beyond time. Your muscles relax as you imagine the workers who tended the ice, carefully stacking blocks and maintaining ventilation shafts. The quiet diligence of their movements, paired with the soft sounds of wind and water, becomes a gentle lullaby. You remember the playful touches, straw symbols, carved ice patterns, children's tiny ice boats, and you smile softly, letting the faint warmth of human whimsy mingle with the cool serenity around you. Each detail, small and deliberate, becomes a note in the overarching symphony of calm. You let the desert night envelop you completely. The distant call of a fox, the whisper of a breeze through palms, and the subtle shimmer of water and irrigation channels merge into a continuous, soothing soundscape. Your mind drifts along with the slow, patient ingenuity of generations past, finding comfort in their quiet persistence. The Yakhchal's dome glows faintly in the moonlight, a reminder that human creativity, patience, and care can leave enduring marks of gentle beauty. As your thoughts slow and your eyelids grow heavier, you feel a quiet connection with the past. Every stone, every ice block, every carefully directed stream of water becomes a gentle embrace, a calm echo of centuries of mindful work. You inhale deeply one last time, savoring the cool, fragrant air, and exhale, letting all tension and wakefulness drift away. The desert night, the village, and the steadfast Yakhchal cradle you in their serene rhythm, guiding you towards soft, uninterrupted rest.